This is The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours along the way, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. Today's episode is with Evelyn Skye, a best-selling author of books for teens and adults. Evelyn's 10th novel, The Incredible Kindness of Paper, is coming out in just a few days on August 12th. So we talk about that, as well as the ups and downs of her long career as a novelist. Evelyn is such a positive person, as you will hear, and you'll be amazed at how cheerfully she discusses her years of rejection and her many, many rejected manuscripts. Before we get started, I just wanted to say this is a brand new podcast, so a big thanks to everyone who's been listening so far. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing, posting about the show on social media, or sharing the show with friends. If you're listening on an app that takes ratings like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, consider giving The Long Road to Publishing a 5-star rating or review because that helps other people find the podcast. In any case, thank you so much for being here. It really does mean a lot to me. Now, on with the show. I'm calling this episode The Most Positive Person in Publishing. Evelyn Skye is the New York Times best-selling author of many novels, including The Incredible Kindness of Paper and The 100 Loves of Juliet. She has also written books for Netflix and Disney. Evelyn's novels have been published worldwide and translated into 16 languages. She's a graduate of Stanford and Harvard Law School. She lives in California with her husband and daughter. Welcome, Evelyn, to The Long Road to Publishing.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Yes, me too. I can't wait. But before we dive into the whole saga of your publishing journey, I know you have a new book coming out August 12th, The Incredible Kindness of Paper. So do you want to give us the elevator pitch?
Yeah, The Incredible Kindness of Paper. It was my book about human connection because I felt like we were all a little bit lonely in the world. You know, we have all this technology that connects us, and yet we're so isolated. And so the story is that Chloe Hanako Quinn, the main character, she is a high school guidance counselor and she loses her job. And so she gives herself a little pep talk by writing an inspirational message for herself inside of a yellow origami rose. But she loses it, and a neighbor finds it, and it turns out to be just the message that her neighbor needs. And so while Chloe's looking for a job, she decides, you know what, why don't I put some good energy into the world? And so she starts leaving these paper roses with little messages all around New York City, and they just find their way to exactly who needs it at that moment. And it becomes a way to connect with people and just see each other, you know, small acts of kindness that can really make a difference.
This sounds so positive, and I'm hoping that maybe it will encourage people to start doing that, and there'll just be little like notes and origami notes floating around the world.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Do you do origami?
I do a little bit. It was something that I grew up with in my family in terms of like my grandmother. So my grandmother, my family's from Taiwan, but my grandmother's generation, they grew up when Taiwan was part of the Japanese kind of empire before World War II. And so she grew up with a lot of Japanese education and Japanese arts, and origami was something she always loved. And so whenever she would visit our family in the United States, she would always bring little gifts of origami to me as a kid, me and my brother. And it was such a delight, you know, the care and the love that goes into these all the little folds to create this beautiful little thing that is pretty ephemeral, really, because it's made of paper. But that was really how origami first came into my life. And I really enjoy making art. I'm not very good at it, but I think that that's okay. You know, it's good to do things sometimes just because it makes us happy and not because we have to monetize it. That's kind of something that Chloe goes through in the book because when her paper roses actually become a worldwide sensation, the guy she's dating at the time says, hey, we should monetize this. You could really get sponsors. You could put sponsorships in your origami paper. And she says, you know what? I don't want to be part of that hustle and grind. I want to just put something out into the world that's good just for the sake of doing that.
Yeah. I feel like there's a message there for writers is like, even if you're not making any money from your writing right now, or, just putting your work and your creativity out into the world, the right person might find it at the right time. Yeah, I love that. Well, we might talk more about it, but we're gonna kind of go back in time because I want to hear the whole journey. So a lot of writers say, oh, I've always wanted to be a writer, but when do you feel like you really got serious and you were like, okay, I'm going to write a book and try to get it published?
So for me, I always liked writing as a kid, but I never thought I could be a writer professionally, not because it was unattainable, just because no one had told me that it was a real job. And so I found it later when I was on maternity leave. In college, let's kind of go back a little bit. In college, I majored in Russian literature. It was wonderful to immerse myself just in writing and story for several years. But then there were no jobs for Russian literature majors if you didn't want to be a professor. So my mom suggested I go to law school. Finally, maybe you should do something that will help you be an adult and make some real money. And so I did that. I was a lawyer for a few years. It just wasn't a right fit, but I was fine. You can be good at things and not love it, and that's okay. It pays the bills. But then I was on maternity leave and I started reading, in those in between like nap times for my baby. And fell in love again with books. I hadn't had time as an adult, I think, to read. And I remembered that I liked writing. And so I thought, well, since I'm away from my job right now, why don't I try to steal little snippets of time during nap time or, whenever, and just write a little bit, which sounds a little bit nuts, really, because if anyone out there has had an infant, you know that they require constant attention. But I think that balance of finding time for yourself as a creative person and finding that kind of fulfillment when you let yourself have something as well, it makes you a better mother. And so that's when I started writing and I thought, oh my gosh, I've never loved anything more than I love writing stories, even though it was hard, even though I didn't know what I was doing. And that was the moment when I finally decided, yes, I think I want to give this a try. And I was 30 years old.
So this is so interesting because, first of all, you're not the first person to tell me that it was when they had a baby that they decided they were going to really pursue writing. And, I'm also the co-host on This Mama Is Lit, which is a podcast where we interview writers who are also mothers. And this has come up that like becoming a mom, it's such a time of your identity is changing, your relationships with people around you are changing. You're kind of like, who am I now? And it is this time of reflection or like, what do I really it's funny because it's like you're putting all your energy on the baby, but you're also thinking like, who am I and what do I want to be doing too? So it's interesting. Okay, so yeah, and I was going to ask you about the law school, and I totally agree that you can be good at something, but it not be your true passion. So okay, so you're 30, you have a baby, you're like, I am going to start writing a book, and tell me what happened then.
So I write 8 manuscripts over 5 years. I get an agent at manuscript number 3. We work together on, 5 of those manuscripts, right? So manuscript 3, I get the agent, then we work on 5 together. He is unable to sell anything to publishers, and I'm ready to quit. But at that point, I've made a lot of friends at writing conferences. And the thing you learn is that the very best friends and mentors that you'll get are the people who are your peers on this journey or the people who are just 1 or 2 steps ahead of you. Because if you try to get mentorship from someone who's already halfway through their career, already published with several books, there's so much that they've actually forgotten. And I can say that now because I'm about to publish my 10th book. It's a little hard for me to think back a decade ago, or actually more if we're talking about before I was published, and remember those nitty gritty moments. But it was because of those friends that I didn't quit because they told me, hey, look, we're starting to get our book deals now, and they had gotten their agents just a little bit before me. And they knew that I'd worked so hard on the craft. And so I just had to find the story that was all me and that was all of the craft I'd learned over those 8, quote unquote failed manuscripts, but really not failed because you're learning every time. And so I left that agent. I went and got a new agent because I decided I wanted something totally different. And that was my first book deal was manuscript number 9.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I love this. I definitely want to like go back and just unpack it all a little bit because I think it's so important. Everything you said is so important for people to know that, the first book you write is probably not going to be the one you get the agent with or get the book deal with. And you're teaching yourself the craft and you're figuring out how to write a whole book length manuscript. So you said you got your agent on your third
Third,
manuscript?
yes.
Okay. Okay. And so in 5 years, you're writing books, you're querying, you're not getting much. But in that time, were you also starting to take classes or starting to meet other writers and kind of get into that world?
Yes, absolutely. So I was going to writers' conferences when I could because I felt like that was a good way to not only just network, but the workshops there were so helpful, both for craft, but also listening in on agents and editors, learning the industry and what they really were looking for. Not to write to what they were looking for because you'll always be behind the trend, but just to get an idea of like what makes a book that can actually sell, that appeals to readers, but that also a publisher says, oh, you know what, the financials make sense on this, right? There will be a big enough market that I can offer this person a book deal. And so I think that that was really important. I was also self-taught. Like I don't have a creative writing degree. Like yes, I studied literature in college, but that's just reading Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. That's reading somebody else's works, and I'm never going to compare myself to those masters, right? But the creative writing I learned myself just through reading craft books and being on online forums, working in forums for queries, so I would like post my query letters and get feedback and I would give feedback to other people. It's really just kind of crowdsourced and honing that skill. But I do think, you mentioned that the first manuscript is probably not the one that's going to get you your agent or your book deal. And I do think that that's very true in general. However, you need to go into it believing that every single manuscript is the greatest thing ever because it is a long road. And if you don't believe that in this industry where you aren't getting constant feedback, like at an office where you get quarterly reviews, you have to have something that drives you. And so I think it's important to have that mix of a sort of healthy delusion and then be able to pull back and be realistic at some point when you're like, you know what, this manuscript isn't working. And so I know I said 8 manuscripts in 5 years. That's a lot of manuscripts. And that's because I would sometimes write a first draft and then realize, you know what, this one doesn't have that special something. And so I'm going to move on. It was good practice, but I need to do something else. And so I tried to be very analytical once I'd written a manuscript, but you allow your art to be the art while you're writing the manuscript.
Being a writer, there's such a balance between kind of opposing psyche, I guess, where like, yeah, you have to, on the one hand, you have to be humble. You have to be able to look at your work and make changes and see that things aren't working. But on the other hand, you also have to have that belief in yourself and that hope to keep going. And I mean, maybe like while you're in the drafting process, you're kind of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. This is the greatest thing. And then in the revision, you get the like more practical, analytical.
Yeah, and it doesn't actually change even when you get further into your career. And so, I had 8 unpublished manuscripts, and then manuscript number 9 became what we can now call manuscript book number 1, right? That was my first book deal, and I'm about to publish book number 10. However, along the way, you still sometimes you'll write a book and your agent will send it out to publishers and no one will want to buy it. And you also have moments where you're writing something and you get comments from your editor and you think, oh my gosh, this is really the worst thing ever. I've had experiences where I've written an entire book, sent it to my editor. My editor took a while to read it and then finally came back to me and said, there's something missing from this book and I don't know what it is and I don't know how to fix it. And I had to say, I am the same way. I've been wrangling with this manuscript in the background for 4 years and I don't know how to fix it either. I was hoping I solved it, but I clearly didn't. And then we had to set that one aside. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's something you take with you throughout the career. Not to be discouraging, though, because I think that once you've published several books, you do have a different level of confidence. And so that's the difference between me pre-published and me now, is that if something doesn't work out, then I can say it's fine because I know that I can write books that are publishable. I'll just do a different one.
Right. It might be discouraging for somebody here if they're working on their first manuscript to hear, you mean this thing that I'm writing that right now I think is amazing isn't going to get published. But it's like once you write a whole book and prove to yourself, okay, I wrote a whole book, so I can do it again and maybe I'll do it better this time. Or, I think for me, because gosh, I don't even remember what manuscript I'm on now, but in the early days, I didn't really know how to revise. So I would like write something and then be like, it's not quite right, or there's something wrong with it, but I don't know how to fix it. And I've gotten better at revision, but still sometimes, I mean, I wrote a manuscript last year that my agent was like, yeah, I love the character and I love the premise, but the plot's not really working. The climax isn't really working. And I was like, yeah, I don't know how to fix it. And then I ended up just writing a whole nother thriller, but I almost feel like I had to write that one to kind of teach myself how to write a thriller and then be like, okay, I don't know how to fix that. Maybe I'll come back to it another day or someday, but now I can do it again, do it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree.
Well, okay, so you were with your agent, you got your first agent, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm trying to remember what you said, and you went on submission with a few books with this agent and did not and none of them sold. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so how were you feeling at that point? Because at that point, you had written a lot of manuscripts. You'd, I assume, had a lot of rejection from being in the query trenches.
So many rejections.
Then you were like, okay, I've got my agent. Finally, it's happening. And then you kept having these books die on submission. Yeah, tell me about your mental and emotional state at that point.
It's really disappointing. So I think when you first get an agent, you can weather that first book going out and getting rejections because you still have that energy like, okay, you know what? That's okay. It was our first attempt. We're going to get up to the plate again, you know? But after, five at bats, you start thinking, "Oh God, is it me?" Right? And
So there were five,
there were I think we probably went on submission with three. Gosh, like I said, it was so long ago. It's hard to
right?
remember. I think maybe a couple of them were ones that I wrote and I sent to him. And then we both agreed, yeah, this one isn't the one. And so I would move on to something else instead of wasting time, quote unquote, wasting time, like revising something that we both knew wasn't something that he felt like was appealing to editors. Some people might say you could do this more smartly and actually discuss with your agent before you wrote something what the idea was and save yourself some time. It just depends on the kind of writer you are. And I was a pantser back then. I didn't outline. I just needed to write the story to see where it went. And I'm still, now I outline a little bit, but I still need that. I still need to write an entire zero draft at least to see, does this story actually have legs? I mean, this happened to me just last year, just maybe 6 or 7 months ago. I had an idea. My editor loved it. It was going to be my second book on this current book deal that I have with Simon and Schuster. And I started writing it. And then after a few weeks, I emailed her. I'm like, nope, this one's got nothing. It's just a pretty hook. And that's it. The characters have no depth. And so I said, I'm going to trash it and write something else. But that's a sense I think that you kind of get either with the input of someone who's a publishing professional or, once you're into the career and you're writing, gosh, I don't know, that was manuscript 20 or 21 for me, if you're counting all of them. And you start to get that feeling like, yeah, this one doesn't have enough to sustain 300, 400 pages. But yeah, I mean, so after all those rejections with my first agent, that's the moment when I felt like I was going to quit. And my friends kind of helped me reframe things instead of trying to write so hard for what I thought editors wanted, maybe step back and write what I wanted and not do so much market analysis. And
Mm.
so I wrote the thing that became the Crown's Game, but at the time it seemed like a wacky idea because it was just a bunch of stuff that I loved from my studies of Russian history and Russian literature in a time period that no one knew about and frankly probably didn't care about in the like 1825 in Imperial Russia. But I think because I wanted to do it, I subconsciously put so much more of me and a certain kind of passion into it that you don't get when you're trying to very technically construct a winning idea to sell to the publishing world. And so that book, however, was so different from what my first agent normally sold that I took the scary step of saying, I think we've had a great run, but I need somebody else. And so that's when I left him and it was amicable. And then I queried all over again, which is frightening because when you have an agent, it's such a great safety net. You feel like, oh, I finally made it, and you just want to stay there forever. But what I've learned, I'm now on agent number 3. I've loved each of my agents at each stage of my career, but they were right for that stage. And then at some point, you realize, okay, like we've had our time together, and now maybe it's time for someone else.
Yeah. Especially before you're published. And especially if you've told people you're a writer, it's nice to be like, oh, well, I'm represented by, at least you have this agent that can give you some legitimacy. And so then, yeah, it's really scary to like break from an agent and then be like, oh gosh, I don't feel, quote unquote legit. And yeah, to have to re-enter the query trenches. Oh, and also I was going to say too, with this book, it's, you always hear write the book that only you can write. And it sounds like this was that for you.
That was the magic. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so re-entering the query trenches, how did that go?
It was frightening and exhilarating at the same time because I felt like this book had something special in it, and I was better at querying this time around. I could do better research. I understood better how to target agents. And because my writing had gotten so much better, right? I mean, I had honed that craft over 9 manuscripts. And so the querying this time was so much less painful. I only queried 13 agents and I had offers from 3 very quickly. And so that was fun, whereas before it was hundreds and hundreds of rejections before I finally landed that first agent. So agent number 2 went a lot better. And then, if you want to fast forward, then after I published 4 books with her, I decided to move on to someone else because I had some interest in shifting from the YA market into adult fiction. And I thought, it was, like I said, time for a change. And the next time I queried, gosh, I think I only queried maybe 4 or 5 agents and I had offers from 3. And so you get better at it the more you understand your own writing and what people are looking for in the industry.
Yeah, and well, that was a question I was going to ask too, because I knew that your earlier books were YA and now you're writing for adult. What made you decide to make that switch?
I think that part of it is the industry shift. And so when I started writing, the reason I started writing was I read Twilight. So that was the heyday of the new YA generation. And that was a huge market. At that time, YA was the place where people were writing fast-paced and yet deep characters. And adult fiction at that time, I believe, if my memory serves correctly, was still more literary and stories tended to be slower. And so I felt like I fit in that space in terms of the kinds of pacing and characters that I like to write was YA. And then a few years after that, maybe 5 or so years later, I felt like the adult commercial fiction market caught on to YA pacing. And so that's what now sometimes we'll see as like book club fiction, really smart, deep characters, but the pacing goes faster. And so we still have literary fiction, which is less plot focused and is more, just character, not very much might happen in the plot, but you spend a lot of time with the characters. And then commercial fiction on the book club fiction side, it does tend to be a little bit pacier. And so it seemed like the right transition for me to move there. And it was also that, life happened. My husband got really sick. And so, you suddenly kind of had to grow up in a different way, and I felt like I lost touch with the teenager side of me that could write young adult. And it was just kind of the right time, I think, for my career.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. I started out writing YA, and I do feel that there was a certain turning point. I maybe it was becoming a mother or a little bit after where I don't know, I just had enough space away from being a teenager that suddenly I started feeling like I wanted to write about adult characters and adult conflicts and but I also agree with you that it does seem, especially lately, I will read adult books and think, gosh, this reads like a YA, but I think it's more what you're talking about of that pacing and that immediacy that people recognized in YA and were like, hey, adults like to read this sort of thing too. Yeah, so okay, so then you got your new agent, so agent number 3, and started publishing books for adults. I want to ask you now, so one of the reasons like I wanted to have you on the show was because I saw this Substack post you wrote about, and I'm going to quote you, the snowball effect to showing up and doing the work year after year, book after book. And you kind of talked in that post a little bit about feeling frustrated at times, maybe like seeing other people have big successes. And I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about that snowball effect that you've experienced?
Definitely. When I first started this career, like I said, it was Twilight, right? And so I thought, oh, Stephanie Meyer, she's immediately a millionaire. And I really wanted to come out huge. And my first book did very well, but it didn't get me to Stephanie Meyer level. And I think that with social media, there's so much perception that if you don't burst out of the gates and become an immediate seven-figure success, then your career will die. And there's that constant saying that like you're only as good as your sales. If you don't sell enough books, no publishers will ever publish you again. And I found actually now a decade into publishing that that's not true, and that the ability to be a very steady author, my average is one book a year, is it's the recipe for an actual long career. You have longevity. So you don't want to be that flash in the pan that comes out super strong. You maybe if you get a seven-figure advance, like good for you for your first book. But I've also seen several of my author friends in my community get those huge advances, and then if their book doesn't actually hit big, then their publishers lose faith in them. And then sadly, they kind of disappear and they stop writing. And I think it's hard to carry that huge expectation at the beginning of your career. And so I have now built a long career where every single year I keep publishing books with the big five publishers. They keep paying me enough advance, that with my husband, the two of us, we can have like a good, steady living. It's not, private jet money or anything like that, but I get to have a career in a creative field, and it's so satisfying. And I think that that's really the goal that we want, is that kind of steadiness. And there are ups and downs. There are manuscripts that I've written that don't get picked up by publishers. And sure, it is true that if your book sales aren't great, then maybe your next book deal, the advance will be a little lower. But you just take that as a challenge, right? You say, I'm going to keep on writing the best book I can, and I will prove to them that this one's going to be even better. And then if it sells well, then your next advance could go higher. So it's unpredictable, as any artist's career is. But it's a beautiful thing if you can ride it and just know that on average, it's it's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you said unpredictable. I think that's so true. The industry is so unpredictable. So being, just like I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing my thing and writing my books, and some of them will sell and some of them won't, and some of them will make more money than others, and it's kind of hard to know which will, in fact, it's impossible to know which will like really hit, but you're kind of like secure in yourself just doing the thing that you love. So that's wonderful. What have you learned, or has anything changed, like with your writing process, or maybe how you approach book launches, or anything like that that's sort of changed and you've learned over the years?
So I think for me, book launches that's changed a little bit. So for my last book that came out last year, I didn't even do a bookstore event. I just did a private party with friends. And when you first have your debut book come out, you should absolutely go big. Do something at your local bookstore, invite everyone because you deserve that celebration. When you're 10 books in, I start feeling bad about calling on my friends every single year saying, hey, come to the exact same bookstore. We're going to do almost the exact same event. And I know that sounds a little sad to someone who might be earlier in their career, but for me, it's actually a really wonderful earned place in the industry where you can be very nonchalant about it and say, oh yeah, I've got another book out, because you have this confidence. I'm going to keep on writing books, and it's really great. And you don't get so desperate about your friends and family buying every single book. I think about other authors sometimes, Jodi Picoult, who puts out so many books, Kate Quinn. And guess what? I don't always buy their books because they're so steady and prolific that sometimes I miss a book that came out. And then I realized, 3 years later, oh my gosh, wait, they had two more books come out? Well, let me go get them now. And I have that same feeling now with my book launches. And so this year I will do a book launch. So I have an event at Books Inc. in Palo Alto on with Alka Joshi on August 13th, and that will be really great. I'm doing a virtual launch on the 17th that everyone's invited to. If they come to my Substack, they'll see the link there, where we're going to do a fun project. We'll do origami roses, and I'll talk about the book and my process. But I'm much more low key about it, and I think it's wonderful to celebrate at the very beginning of your career, but there's also something just so nice and relaxed about saying, yeah, book launch, cool. Let's launch another book out into the world, but I'm not going to stress so much about the publicity.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes total sense to me. Yeah, it's just it's your job. It's just another book coming out.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice that you've gotten to that place where it's sort of just commonplace,
Yeah.
right? Well, so you mentioned your Substack, and I know, you have your own writing podcast and you have this community on Substack. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, Creative Inspired Happy is my Substack. It's also a literary podcast, and I run a book club there. It's the Read Like a Writer book club. And it's just kind of a happy community. It's a very friendly place. I try to be very positive. There's a lot of publishing is hard. And I think that sometimes there's a lot of downers out there about publishing. And so I really try to explain what's going on in publishing, really give the behind the scenes looks and be transparent, but be very positive about it because I've had overall such a great experience. And I want for everyone out there who is an aspiring author or is already, a few books in, or maybe even many books in, I want them to feel like this is a good place to be and it's still a career worth having, or even if it's not a career, like a hobby worth pursuing on the side while you have a paying job that puts less stress on your art. And so it's been so fun. And I've gotten to interview some of the real literary greats now. So, like Lisa Jewell, Kate Quinn, V. Schwab, like just really a lot of fun talking to them, kind of behind the scenes, like we're doing here. And it's just, it's a joy to talk to people who are deep in their publishing process, writing different kinds of books, and seeing how do they feel, about writing books and what does storytelling mean to them?
I just listened to the Lisa Jewell episode the other day. It was wonderful. And yeah, I mean, you are such a great example. I mean, not only you just seem like such a positive person to begin with, but also, of course, hindsight is 2020. But if we look at your trajectory, it's like you had a lot of rejection. You had years of writing and not getting an agent, and then writing more books and not still not getting them published. And you any of those moments you might have said, well, I've tried and I've failed and I'm gonna quit. But I always say if you're still trying, you haven't failed, and you kept trying. And now, here you are where you're like, oh yeah, I'm publishing another book, no big deal. you know, you've got this great community, you've got this beautiful new book coming out because I'm looking at the cover behind you. And it's just, I think it's a really good thing for people to hear that it doesn't happen overnight and you just keep going and keep that balance of being, positive and maybe slightly quote unquote delusional, but then also like learning and continuing to hone your craft. And yeah, I love all of this. This is amazing. Well, so what is something that has surprised you on your writing or publishing journey? And it can be either good or bad or one of each.
I think that I started out with a lot of ambition. And part of that is because I'm an Enneagram 3. And so I am driven by ambition and external validation. And
You were like, I'm
publishing,
going to be the next Stephanie Meyer.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that publishing also requires a lot of smoke and mirrors, especially when you're getting started, or even, I mean, even now, honestly, there's sometimes the pressure on social media to act like everything is so great. And in reality, you're crying under your desk, right? Because you just saw the worst review, or your editor just told you something that, like, horrible about this manuscript that you had your heart set on. And what I've learned, though, is that these careers, the most satisfying careers, are actually pretty normal looking. And I know we want to believe that once you make it, once you've got the book deal, then it's all glamour and red carpets. And I've been lucky enough to walk a red carpet before when I worked with Netflix. And you know what? Like it was cool, but it wasn't any kind of life-changing moment. It was just a day that I got dressed up and then I was there at the movie premiere and the after party. And then I thought, not really. I'm good. The introvert part of me was done. I went back to the hotel room with my family and we packed up the next day from New York and went and flew back home to California. And the normalcy ends up being the thing that is weirdly satisfying. I think it's a little bit disappointing at first when you realize, oh, this is just a normal job. And then you settle into that, oh, cool, this is just a normal job, and it becomes less daunting because it's easier to show up every day at your desk and write something. And yeah, the smoke and mirrors still makes me a little bit uncomfortable, like having to always promote your book but it's also just a reality of the publishing world. The publishers, the publicists there are amazing, but they're completely overwhelmed. They're assigned with too many books every single season. And so I think the message I want people to know there is there's a lot of resentment, I think, about publishers not supporting books enough and people say, "Oh, I wish that like authors didn't have to be out there." And yeah, I wish I didn't have to be on Instagram. But at the same time, like how cool is it that we live in a time when the writers can connect with their readers on their terms if they want to. Whereas before you could never do that. Before the publishers were the gatekeepers and they decided where the author showed up for events or press, and that was it. But now I can talk to my readers directly on my Substack or, through my Instagram comments if I want to. So I think it all just depends on the lens you put on it, how
Yeah.
you decide what that looks like for you.
Yeah. Well, this is perfect because I did want to ask you, you recently wrote in your newsletter about book promotion and specifically working with Book Talk and Bookstagram and YouTube and Substack book influencers. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. What do you find has worked best for you when you're connecting with those like book influencers?
So I think one of the most important things is that you can't get razzled and dazzled by the influencers who have a ton of followers if they're not in love with the kinds of books that you write. And so it's really important to do your research and find out who's reading what you're writing. And it doesn't matter if they have, let's say, quote unquote, only 2,000 followers, which is a lot, and don't get seduced by, oh, well, this person has 200,000. I want them because they're getting so much mail and so much email. I mean, I'm sure too, being on the side of a podcast, I get so many pitches for my podcast, and people don't realize the volume of pitches that you're getting when you're any kind of public figure in this book space. But those influencers with 100,000, 200,000 followers, like if you just mail them something without them saying, yes, I want it, they're just going to throw it away probably. But if you reach out to people who love, let's say, your Southern Gothic mystery, and that's their thing, their followers, that's also their followers' thing. And so if they recommend a book, they're going to be passionate about it. You're going to get so much more attention on your story that way. So that's really like one of the biggest tips that I have is don't be tricked by numbers.
Yeah, well, and also you can look at how many followers somebody has, but you don't know what their engagement is, right? Where, like I can look and see how many people open my emails on Substack and be like, oh, okay, well, I don't have like the hugest following, but the people who are subscribed to me are opening my emails, and that can make a big difference too.
Mhm.
Well, I end every episode with a tip for the road for our listeners, and it can be a tip about writing or how to survive rejection or self-doubt or anything else along the writing path. So, what is your tip for the road?
I think it is tried and true, but it really is to write what is you. And the more that you're willing to put yourself into a book, and that doesn't mean oversharing your life if that's not what you're comfortable with, but the more you can put your own worldview in or your passions into your characters or into the story, the more that really resonates with the reader on the other side because they feel like someone else sees them. And your ideal reader is the one who wants the kind of stories that you have to tell. And so, for example, with The Incredible Kindness of Paper, this is a wonderfully hopeful and sweet story. It is not for people who are cynics or skeptics who are just incorrigibly so, who will never be able to see hope. Like, because that's not me. I can find silver linings and things. But it is for people who think, gosh, I would like a little more good in the world, right? And so I put that out there, and I feel like this is the kind of book where some people are going to say, ugh, that book it's unrealistic. No one could possibly be that hopeful. And other people are going to resonate with it and think, oh, yeah, I want that in the world. I wish we could make this a reality. And so that's really my advice for any writers out there is be you, be unabashedly you, and your stories will find the readers who need to hear those words.
I think that makes so much sense. And, you can't please everybody and you'll go crazy trying. But, well, it reminds me, I'm teaching a class right now on first pages. And I was saying, what draws someone in with the first page? Because we're like, okay, of course you want to hook the reader in the very first page and draw them in. But what that means differs depending on what a reader likes and what genre they like. And, what I think is an amazing first page might not necessarily be what you or someone else thinks is an amazing first page. So yeah, just being yourself, writing for those readers who want to read what you have to give, I think. Going back to the incredible kindness of paper, you said, it kind of maybe came from your grandmother creating origami. I don't know. Is there anything else you can tell us about what inspired the book?
A lot of it was just thinking that people don't take enough time to put a little kindness into the world. They don't realize that it doesn't cost them very much just to smile at someone or to give someone a compliment, and that can completely change someone's day. And so I think it's a little disarming for people sometimes, or unsettling, when I just surprise them with a compliment. Like, I was at CVS the other day picking up a prescription, and once my transaction rang through, I said to the pharmacist, "You're doing such an amazing job. You're awesome. Thank you." And she looked at me and she was startled and she didn't know what to say. And I didn't mean to make her feel that way, but I think that reaction was proof that people get complained at all the time, especially in customer service. Or one of my favorite examples that I learned through writing this book was, you get into an Uber and you don't even say hi to people. How many people just look at their app and they get in the car and the Uber driver has to say, "Are you Evelyn?" And you say, "Yeah." And that's it. And they're on their phone the whole time. And I'm not saying you have to engage in an entire conversation, but remember that person is human. It doesn't cost you that much to take a moment and just say, like, "Hey, Ricky, I'm Evelyn. How are you doing today?" And if you're tired, you don't have to finish the conversation beyond that, but we connect a little bit, right? And so I just wanted to put that energy out into the world, because it's easy to not see other people and then to feel bad about ourselves because other people aren't seeing us. So I think that's the message that I want to encourage people with this book, is just, I don't know, take a little bit of time, because you can easily make a difference in someone else's life. And how incredibly powerful and magical is that?
Yeah. I think this is such a good reminder, just like you said, how easy it is. I'll notice sometimes, I'm at the grocery store and I'll realize I haven't really looked at the person who's checking me out. And I'll just take the time to like look them in the eyes and like smile and say thank you. Or, I always think to myself, if I'm thinking something nice about a person, I should just share it,
Yes.
Like if I'm thinking, wow, that, checkout person has amazing nails. Why not say, I love your nails? Or if I'm like, oh, my husband looks nice in that shirt. I'm like, why don't I say that out loud? You know?
Yeah.
So I think this is a really good reminder. And yeah, hopefully everybody will read your book and start putting some random acts of kindness into the world themselves.
I love
So
it. I hope so.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been so interesting to hear your whole journey.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
The Long Road to Publishing is produced and edited by me, Eva Langston, and the intro and outro music comes from the artist Soundroll on Upbeat. You can find me online on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. Even better, find my newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com, and feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more stories about the long and winding path to publishing and more tips for the road.